Okay, should we get started? Good evening, everyone. I'm Amy Sangiolo, Vice Chair of the Newton Democratic City Committee and Chair of the new Climate Crisis Subcommittee. I'd like to welcome everyone to the first of many panels we will be hosting about the climate crisis. Whether it's because of the increased incidence of extreme weather, rising or warming seas, the energy crisis caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, of any of the thousand of other reasons, people everywhere are recognizing that society has to change its relationship to fossil fuels. But what are the best ways of doing this? What is already being done? What is already being considered at the municipal, state, or federal levels? These are some of the questions we intend to address in this series of panels. We will provide you with information that you may need to understand the solutions being considered or implemented to help you get involved as a voter, as an activist, or as a consumer. Tonight, we have a great panel of activist leaders who will educate us about their organization's efforts to influence state-level climate and energy policies. Moderating our panel is former State Representative Jen Benson. Jen is currently the president of the Alliance for Business Leadership, an organization that is itself a force for progressive action on a range of issues, including climate change. If folks have questions, please put them in the chat. Thank you for coming tonight. Jen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you for the NDCC Environmental Subcommittee and, of course, the entire committee, City Committee, for hosting this important event as we near the end of Earth Month. We are reminded and re-inspired and recalled to double our efforts to address the threat of climate change. We know there's more the United States can do to tackle this threat, but let's talk about what we can do right here in Massachusetts. We're joined by three experts to help us understand not only what is currently happening at the state level, but how you can get involved right now to make a difference. So let's welcome them. First, we'll hear from Deb Pasternak, Sierra Club. She's a lifelong environmentalist. Deb worked in photovoltaics in 1986. In the early 2000s, shifting from a career as a performing songwriter, Deb began working in wind farm development to establish the proven technology from Europe here in the US. When it became clear that the lack of renewable energy deployment and all climate action Sorry, my husband's out and he's not dog wrangling tonight. I'm so sorry. And all climate action in the US was the result of political barriers rather than finance or technology. Deb turned her career to advocacy, and we're so glad she did. Volunteering with and eventually becoming the state director for the Sierra Club here in Massachusetts, where she now works for a just and equitable transition to a renewable energy economy. Mark Dian. Mark is a member of 350 Mass, Newton Node and co-chair of 350 Mass statewide legislative team. Prior to retirement, Mark was a founder of Conservation Services Group, which became the largest provider of residential conservation services in the US. He has helped design and manage conservation programs in Massachusetts and in 15 other states, and has advised program design for the US Department of Energy. Carrie Catan is from Climate Exchange. She's the state manager of Climate Exchange and a facilitator of the Green Future Now Coalition. Before joining Climate Exchange, she worked to turn out voters in the 2020 election. So critical. Thank you so much. And before I move to questions, we're going to have some opening statements from our guests. I just want to mention one quick thing. Sierra Club holds a very special place in my heart. My mother-in-law was a long-standing leader in the Sierra Club in Pennsylvania. She passed away last year from COVID. And I have to thank you for all of your work. She was a biologist and environmentalist, and I hope we all take a moment to think about the important work that you all do and the work that she did throughout her career. So Deb, why don't you give us a little bit of background of what you're doing at the Sierra Club?
Thank you so much, Jen. And I'm so sorry that your mom passed from COVID last year, and so amazed to hear of another incredible volunteer leader in Sierra Club. That's just, yeah, it's a pretty amazing organization, which I only found out about when I went to a workshop where Emily Norton, city councilor, who was the state director for Sierra Club before me, was speaking. And that was when I learned about Sierra Club and decided to get involved. So anyhow, for those of you who aren't familiar, Sierra Club is an 127-year-old national environmental organization that works with justice at our center. We're made up of 64 chapters across the country, over 800 staff, and over 4,000 volunteer leaders, like Jen's mother-in-law, and over 3 million members and supporters that are dedicated to preserving a healthy environment and mobilizing for climate justice. We have 5 pillars for our work. We have analysts who work and help create to advance ambitious and achievable policies. We have lawyers who show up in the courts to fight for those policies. We have organizers and field staff who organize and mobilize members and supporters to pressure local, state, regional, and federal governments into action. And we work to endorse and elect climate champions up and down the ballot. The club has also recently been getting into climate finance advocacy, working with partners to pressure asset managers, banks, insurance companies, and investors to stop financing the build out of fossil fuel infrastructure around the globe. Here in Massachusetts, we have over 80,000 people on our email list alone, and we are involved in campaigns to advance a just transition to a renewable energy economy, as well as protecting our environment and communities from toxics such as pesticides, PFAS, and plastics, as well as working to protect open spaces and wildlife. Our organization has several statewide teams that work to advance these intersectional environmental and climate issues, from forest protection team to a toxics team to a building electrification team to a team focused on issues on Cape Cod. There's literally well over a dozen. Every person involved makes a difference, whether you are helping to pass an ordinance in your community, lobbying the State House, protesting fossil fuel infrastructure build out, or serving as a volunteer leading or governing this chapter, or donating the money to power our movement. Every single person makes a difference. And if you're interested in learning more about how to get involved, you can check out our website, as well as the partner websites for the partners who are on this call and the many different partners across the state. You should volunteer and work with the organization that you resonate with. There's so many of us doing great action, and the people that inspire you are the people who you should be working with. In terms of taking action, there are statewide processes, lobbying the legislature, passing meaningful, equitable policies and laws, and then bird dogging and pushing the equitable, meaningful implementation of those policies in the governor's administration. So anyhow, whether or not you work on a municipal level or on a statewide level or on a regional level, we've got lots of ways to plug you into work, and really grateful for this opportunity to present to the folks of Newton.
Mark, do you want to give us an overview and an update on what 350 Mass is doing?
Sure. 350 Massachusetts is the local branch of the 350 organization that was inspired by and effectively founded by Bill McKibben, I don't know, about 10 years ago. I don't remember the exact thing. So not nearly as old as an organization as the Sierra Club, although some of us are older than some Sierra Club members. We work on both on international, national, state, and local levels. And our Massachusetts organization is really working at 2 levels. We have 18 regional or town nodes. The Newton node is one of them, but we cover most of the state. And those nodes, I'm not going to talk about this much tonight, work on local issues from housing and zoning to electrification of public transit, and promotion of solar and other renewable energy. On the state level, we work in a variety of ways. We do grassroots lobbying and organization around a range of issues, which I'll get into. We do direct actions from let's see, at one end from demonstrating against the firms that invest in the fossil fuel industry, to some of our members are now fasting to help oppose the construction of a peaker plant on the North Shore, to a variety of other direct action tactics. So, and we look at these issues with through a lens of social justice, as most of the organizations active now are doing. And we too would welcome new members to help us make change. We've spent a fair amount of time trying to figure out what can be done on the state level to affect these issues. And we are focused on the three key areas that are the sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the Commonwealth. In order: transportation, primarily the heating of buildings, and the generation of electric power themselves. Those three sectors are responsible for more than 80% of the emissions in the Commonwealth. And we are working on legislation and more direct action to try to deal with all of them, which I hope people will ask me questions about, so I can give you more detailed answers. But the short version is electrify everything and produce the electricity from non-emitting sources. And that's the biggest contribution that this Commonwealth can make to that fight. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Carrie, why don't you share with us what Climate Exchange is doing? And I would like to put in a plug. I've worked with all of your organizations as a legislator and now at ABL, but Climate Exchange and I did a lot of work together on carbon pricing, for one thing. And I was always impressed. Great organization. Carrie, talk to us about what you're working on now.
Yeah, so my name's Carrie Tan. So nationally, Climate Exchange does a few different things, including research and a state climate policy network, which connects environmentalists and advocates in different states to talk to each other. But in Massachusetts, we're very focused on actually the latest iteration of the bill we were working with Jen Benson on a few sessions ago. And this bill is called the Green Future Act. Its sponsor is Representative Driscoll. I think I've actually spoken to this group before on this bill a few months back. And we've done a lot of work this last year, from having phone banks to call people in representative districts where we didn't have any supporters at the moment, to postcode campaigns, to getting petition signatures. We and the Green Future Now Coalition, which I help facilitate, and which I know at least one person in the audience is a member of. Hi, Ellie. We've been working very hard to pass the Green Future Act through the Massachusetts House, and through that effort, we are now up to 91 co-sponsors, which is very exciting.
Congrats, that's great news. I'm happy to hear that, and always need more. So I applaud your efforts to get some more reps and senators onto that bill. So let's move into some questions to kick off the questions and get everybody's creative juices flowing. But let's start off by just talking about, what are some of the barriers to climate action here in Massachusetts? I think many of us read the news and hear a lot of the successes in Massachusetts, but there's more that we need to do. And so what do you see as some of those barriers? And maybe we'll mix it up in order. Carrie, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I would say that the biggest barrier for action I see in working in Massachusetts, I think, is a mindset we have as both voters, and I think our elected officials also some of them at least have this, where they kind of assume, oh, we're Massachusetts, we're doing well when it comes to climate change. And then if you look at actual statistics, when it comes to the amount of renewable energy that the state uses, we come in 27th below Wyoming and Tennessee, and we're just barely beating North Carolina. So when you look at the actual numbers, it's kind of sobering that we don't live up to, how I think many of us think we do. And I think a lot of our elected leaders tend to pass climate legislation and pat themselves on the back. And reporters will be like, this is sweeping climate legislation, without really looking into the details and questioning like, wait, why is this watered down? Or why is this done this way? Or why do utility companies run our energy efficiency program? That seems odd. So I think if we start asking tougher questions, then we can see more change and people will pat themselves on the back less.
Well, I can say as far as energy efficiency, we were leading the country for many years because I spearheaded that in the legislature. So maybe I will pat myself on the back.
Okay, you can pat yourself on the back, not if obviously if every lawmaker was a Jen Benson, we would not have this problem.
Oh gosh, well that's high praise, but Mark.
Yeah, I'll just say one thing about our efficiency program since I helped design it. Thank you very much for the legislation authorizing it. It's probably the best in the country. And still is. But, if you think about the rest of the country, and I've worked in a lot of it, it's like, yeah, we're the best in the country. Most of the programs are completely terrible. Ours is pretty good and much bigger and, about a fifth of what we need. To meet the state's goals right now in terms of capacity. If I'm looking at, I guess from our perspective and working with Mothers Out Front and a few other organizations, right now the biggest obstacle is the political power and impact of the gas companies who are attempting to build us into a future where gas will continue to be used forever, or at least beyond 2050. And where gas will go from being primarily fossil fuel and fracked gas to a mixture of those gases, hydrogen and synthetic and biogas that would be put into the pipes as soon as they get legal authorization to do so. At least from our perspective and working with Mothers Out Front, this is a burning question before the Commonwealth. Are we going to go down a path towards continued use of gas and the importation of exotic and possibly dangerous gases? Or are we going to go towards electrifying heating and generating electricity from renewable sources and making our buildings more efficient, safer, and healthier? That's a big deal facing us right now because it can be done by regulation, not by legislation.
Deb, jump in here.
Yeah, those are great first answers. And a third one that I'll add is that the climate policies that we've come up with up till now have really mostly benefited mostly wealthy and white communities, which means that we're never going to get off of fossil fuels until we get all of us off of fossil fuels. And we're leaving the folks who can least afford to do it out in the cold. So I think that's a tremendous failure of our leadership and a tremendous place for improvement. And that's going to only happen by building a broader movement where we center the needs and the issues of those who are most vulnerable and who can least afford to buy a heat pump or get an electric car or put a solar panel on their house, that we prioritize that they receive the benefits of the policies first. And I think that until we do that, we will continue to have programs that just keep on missing the mark on being effective. So that's what I'd add.
Great. Thank you for that. And to follow along with this, perhaps it's a barrier, perhaps not. Which state officials are most important in bringing about climate change legislation or change, period? I get asked this a lot. Where should you be focusing your energy? And I wonder if you all have the same answer to this. I'm going to start, Mark, I'm going to start with you this time.
I mean, I guess it's not a great answer, but I think it depends on what you're going for. I mean, the legislature is key in setting the stage and the direction of things, and for appropriating money, always helpful in getting things done. We've got sort of in, but not quite in the executive branch, we got the Department of Public Utilities, which oversees the energy efficiency programs and the rates that the utilities charge. And interestingly enough, some issues around fleet use, if we're interested in electrification of vehicles as well. So we end up working with many of the organizations. The thing that we're missing at the moment, most in Massachusetts, is aggressive leadership from the governor's office on these matters, because it's a position which uniquely sets the tone and direction of policy. And the governor has many virtues. He's quite tall, for instance, but he has not been an aggressive leader on these issues. And we're kind of hoping that something changes there in November and in January.
Well, Deb, I don't know if being tall, I'm pretty tall. I don't think being tall is necessarily a virtue.
I was reaching for something.
Yeah. What do you think? And I would even dig down a little bit more, is talking about the legislature as a single entity. I would even ask you, is it the chairs of committees? Is it your particular legislator? When I'm asked who you should go to, what do you tell people?
Oh boy, I tell people go to the depends what you're asking. Everybody's a leader. If you live in a community with a municipal light plant, then you need to go to your municipal light board. If you live in a community with a city council like Newton, you need to go to them. And if you want to get statewide climate action, statutory action done, which means like creating, like what happened last year where they created the emissions reductions targets, well, then you go to the state legislature. And depending on where in the process that legislation is, designs who you're going to speak with, or determines who you'll go to, right? So obviously the speaker is going to be the most important person in the legislature, but you might not have access to him. You might have access to your legislature who's in leadership, and then your local state rep, and then if they're in leadership, they have a little bit more of a closer relationship to the speaker, or at least perhaps to the chair of Ways and Means. So it really, this is the kind of stuff that you want to get involved with one of our organizations for, because we will help guide you into the process and who to speak with when to best advance these bills. And then finally, just like Mark said, the governor's administration is incredibly important in implementing all of these great laws. And as we've seen for the last 8 years, we've had a governor who basically slowed down a lot of great climate action that had been created in the legislature. So the governor is incredibly important, and in the governor's administration there are dozens of different leaders that you're going to want to speak with on different issues around different policies. Again, getting involved in any of our organizations and speaking with us about how to plug in is going to help you guide you into where you want to go.
Carrie.
So I obviously am very self-interested in saying the legislature matters, because that's just where I've been putting all of my energy in the last year as far as organizing. But yeah, I definitely agree. It's who you talk to in the legislature definitely matters. In the case of supporting the Green Future Act, about a year ago, we were pretty deliberate in making a list of 30 legislators with the idea of, well, we can't lobby the speaker because he's too big of a fish for us, but who does the speaker talk to? We're going to go after them. And that, I think, has worked pretty well. So focusing on not the top of leadership, who will just probably be irritated if you try to talk to them, but the people that they consult is definitely one way to advance climate policy.
So I'm seeing some really great questions coming in from the audience, but part of this conversation, I'm going to quickly go to Amy's point that you have great legislators in Newton, and you do. I know them, and I served with them. They're fantastic. So what else can Newton residents do? And I think Deb said something really important that I want to underscore is joining one of these or all of these organizations or similar organizations is really important, because then you have not only information about what bills are filed, when they're moving, what the talking points are, but you also get alerts. This is when you should be contacting so-and-so. This is what you should be saying. This is when this bill is moving. So you're getting the who, what, and why, and when right in your inbox. And so, you know, it might not be that you need to contact your particular legislator. It might be you need to contact your friends in somebody else's territory, right? And that might be the best use of your time, because your legislators are already there with you. So it could be, you know, you could have been calling people in my district and helping me out, right? So, you know, I think that we need to see ourselves as not just being insular within our own district, and you can only talk to your legislator. Think about where you can, you know, if your legislator's already with you, where can you lend support? And so whether it is changing the mind of a legislator in a different community, or helping shore up a legislator who's trying to do the right thing in a community that isn't really supporting them. So that's some other ideas. So let's go to some of these other questions. I think it's really important. So we have two questions about programs for lower income residents. So we have two questions relating to that. What type of programs would you recommend? We have lower income citizens who are typically already less carbon intensive, of course, because they're not buying huge mansions and huge SUVs, right? What can we recommend for them? What are we fighting for them to make sure that there are programs doing exactly what you mentioned, Deb, about reducing their carbon footprint, something that they can really hold on to?
Well,
Sorry, is that question?
Mark, I think Mark has his hand up already. He's got an answer for us.
well, I mean, there are two, I'll give you two examples. One thing, and it also sort of plays on the last question, what can a local senator who's already with you do? We put forward the idea that we should have an extra incentive for people to buy an electric vehicle who have and can turn in a gas guzzler, an older vehicle. It's not obviously, well, basically, low-income people tend to have older, more gas-guzzling cars. It is true they have a lower carbon footprint overall, but in fact, the cars aren't. And we thought that an incentive that was aimed particularly at those people, boosting the rebate that you get for buying an electric vehicle, new or used, which the old ones don't do, that you could get by turning in your old gas guzzler, would have a strong redistributive effect and bring these vehicles into the hands of lower income people quickly. So where do we get it done? Well, we talked to Senator Cynthia Cream about it in a list of ideas. And in the middle of the conversation, she turned to her staff person and said, okay, why don't we put that into a bill? And so that little clause is in the bill that the Senate just passed, last week. That came out, it didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of a lot of research that our organization and others have done as to what works. But having a sympathetic senator who was willing to take the plunge on the thing without a whole lot of lobbying and effort was really helpful. Now we got to make it survive in the House. But the general thing here is that you want to look at every program that's suggested and figure out how does a low-income individual, a low-income neighborhood, a low-income family take advantage of this? What special things, in addition to more money, do you have to do to make that work? And that, you have to do that systematically with every approach that we're making.
Deb, this time I'm going to go to you next.
Yeah, so yeah, just in transportation policy, another policy that, you know, would make it much easier for low income residents would be, you know, instant rebate, like on the hood, rather than a tax rebate. Again, giving people money instead of giving them, a lot of people don't have tax appetite if they're low income people. So giving them money as opposed to a tax rebate and an instant cash back will make a big difference. And that's for transportation. In housing or electrification of housing, there's so much that we can do. And it's really, you know, part of it is about writing the way that we've invested in our marginalized and low income communities for decades, right? We, you know, a lot of times people are like, well, they can't put solar panels on or electrify their house because their electric systems can't, you know, need to be upgraded, and they don't have, you know, their roofs are too shoddy. And it's like, well, this is a time for us to actually invest in weatherization and safety and health improvements in these houses at the same time as electrification. And so, you know, one of the policies that our coalition is pushing for is, and we're still pushing for it, is using some of that ARPA money. And so, you know, when Governor Baker made that spending proposal with ARPA money a couple of weeks ago, I got, you know, calls from reporters saying, well, or a few days ago, whenever it was, I got reporters saying, what do you think about the ARPA proposal from Baker? And I'm like, well, you know, it's money for housing, low-income housing, affordable housing. That looks great, but I actually have no visibility into how that program is actually going to create healthy and well-built, clean, resilient, healthy housing for low-income people. We have a history of putting up shoddy housing for low-income people. So anyhow, so that's, you know, that's another policy that we're working to advocate for, is to braid, as they call it, braid together different sources of funding. So that is the, you know, weatherization program and electrification, you know, mass save incentives and federal incentives, and to braid together all this funding together to be able to provide low-income people not only with an electrified retrofit to their home or electrified system for their home, but also a much more healthy and much more resilient, climate resilient home in bad weather.
Carrie.
Yeah, so as far as low-income programs, one thing that is in H3292, the Green Future Act, that a lot of local community groups have asked for, and that we've been pushing very hard for in this bill, is funding for communities, specifically funding for communities not based off how we currently do it with the Green Communities program, which is grant-based, but instead doing it on a per capita basis with extra money for EJ communities, and shifting that funding mechanism, while it's less direct than programs that deal with individuals, would allow money to get to communities that have been traditionally underserved, and would allow for those towns to manage whatever programs that they see that their residents need the most.
Yep, great. Great, and a lot of thought and research went into that. Exactly how in the research for that, we were actually on the cutting edge of even defining what an EJ community was, because there was no definition for it at the time. Peg brings up a really interesting point, that incentives for heat pumps, electric cars, solar panels, etc., are only useful if those products are actually available. I would add on to that, they're only useful if you can afford them. And so that's been, I think, one of the big issues that we have talked about at ABL, and our Climate Council has talked about, is particularly around even EVs, even with rebates, are often just unaffordable for a lot of people. And so putting a lot of tax dollars and revenue into those programs is really something that's hotly debated right now, and how we should be investing in policies and making sure we're driving dollars toward communities that truly need them. And I'm wondering if, and I welcome, you know, conversation from the audience as well, if you're having these internal dialogues in your organizations as well. Carrie, I'm going to go with you first because you're
Um,
unmuted.
Yeah, so we've definitely had this conversation at Climate Exchange. And I think that one thing that's at least very clear to me is as far as we definitely can be designing programs to help low-income folks more, especially if we target tax dollars, maybe not even necessarily towards personal electric vehicles, but to some of the things that make the biggest impact when it comes to low-income communities, like buses and rail, and things where you can, if you electrify that, you have on a per dollar basis, a much bigger effect on public health. And it's something that can touch low-income folks, you know, not when the car is a used hand-me-down 10 years from now, but pretty immediately. And definitely transit authorities across the state, not just the MBTA, could really use more funding for bus electrification.
And I would add school districts for school buses as well to that. Mark?
Yeah, and I guess I would say you have to do both. I'm trying to remember the numbers, but almost a vast majority of people live in households that own a vehicle, own a car. And so you have to help those people move off internal combustion engines to electric vehicles as well. And you have to do with the fleets. One of the interesting things that came out in the Senate bill is that in the Senate bill that was just passed is the Department of Public Utilities regulates what I call pseudo fleets, Uber and Lyft, organizations like that. And they are talking about using that regulatory power to push those organizations to help their drivers get EVs and used EVs. And I think that that's an important approach, but you basically have to look at the entire transportation fleet between now and 2035, 2040. We basically have to be all electric or all some other kind of not emitting power throughout it. And it's a big project, but you can't leave anything out because the systems that make those cars, trucks, vans go are going to remain here, spewing gases into the atmosphere in, primarily in low-income and concentrated communities, but throughout until they're switched off and we go to another source of power.
Deb?
Yeah, agreed with both of you. And just wanted to point out, both EVs and public transit. In terms of EVs, one of the exciting things about the more EV changes to the more EV rebate plan is that they are now giving rebates for used EVs, which is yay, hallelujah. At least they say they're about to do that. And then in terms of transit, yeah, electrification transit, but we also need to make it reliable and frequent. I live out in Westboro and it takes me an hour and a half on the local train, the non-express train, which is right now all they are running. So, that's insane. It takes me 40 minutes in my car. So, we need to make reliable, frequent, accessible, affordable transit. We need to have fares for low-income people. Driving in to town, if I find parking, is actually cheaper than taking the train and parking here at the T. So we need to change that equation. And we need to stop focusing on building highways and start focusing on building transit. I mean, highways are fine, but transit is essential.
Agreed. And I'll put my other hat on as chair of the board of transportation for Massachusetts. That is what we are working on. And we are making a big push for reduced fares. And so I thank you for plugging that. So let's move to, let's see, I'm trying to go through the questions and see what else we have coming in. And we have a question about, this is a great question. Oh no, Mark, that was your answer to a question, never mind. what's the driver for the prevalence of fossil fuel use in Massachusetts? So thinking from archaic heating oil to natural gas, to make belief fuels like hydrogen, etc. So how is this influence from the industry manifested? And, you know, so I think you touched on this, Mark, already. I think we're going to see a huge push to the green hydrogen. This is already in the ecosystem, with combining with the offshore wind industry, right? So who is driving? Oh, I think I can answer that myself. Who is driving that, right? But why is there still this grasp on the system? And I mean, not just the Massachusetts legislative system or anything like that, but if you're looking at the ISO New England decision, if you're looking at sort of both regionally and federally, this is a huge issue when we're seeing renewable energy coming down in price, right? So we're propping up an antiquated industry, and yet we're seeing renewables really competing at a much greater level than ever before. Did I set that up properly, Mark?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I mean, in terms of your point, Jen Benson, on the setting things up side, the decision by our regional electricity provider to insist that renewables not bid at the price that they could deliver services at, but bid at a higher price so that they do not compete so much with gas. Decision made in, I believe, late November, early December of last year, is sort of a stunning example of, you know, what we used to call regulatory capture. I think we still do call it regulatory capture, where the ISO New England sees its job as keeping the gas companies in the business of selling gas to the electric companies, which are often the same companies, to generate electricity. The other thing that we're seeing right now is I don't know whether people have followed this, but at the request of Attorney General Maura Healey, the Department of Public Utilities launched a investigation into what they called the future of gas about a year ago. And they decided that they weren't expert enough to do it. And what they would do is have some experts plot out the future of gas. And the experts they chose were the gas companies, who came out with a study that said, and nobody's going to believe this, but it said that we have to keep using pipeline gas up to and beyond 2050. And the gas companies were pleased by this surprising result and have filed proposals to increase their rates above what they've already increased them to, so that they can incorporate hydrogen, biomethane, and synthetic natural gas into the pipeline system that they already happen to own, and are busily replacing at the cost of $1 million a mile with plastic pipes that should be sealed tight enough so they could carry hydrogen. Now, I'm not going to say that there's a conspiracy here, because it's out in the open as a policy effort. So when you see, you know, who's got their finger on the scale on this one, it's pretty clear. That's why we're working with a lot of people to try, and a lot of organizations, Mothers Out Front in particular, Sierra Club also, to try and get the legislature and the regulators to block this plan. Because once they spend $40 billion replacing every pipe in Massachusetts that carries gas, there'll be a great deal of pressure to keep using that pipe to bring us methane, even when we're trying to get off methane onto electricity. I'm sorry, that's a longer answer than you're looking for, but that's the.
Well, I find it ironic that we went through a major effort in the legislature to categorize all of the gas leaks in Massachusetts, and that did not get them to upgrade the gas pipes in Massachusetts. So,
if I may, what they did with that law, right? The law said they had to replace all leaks and leak-prone pipes with pipe, and the gas companies have interpreted that second part as being replacing all the pipes, because they're all leak-prone, which is probably true. But it means that we are going to pay them to put in pipes that are specifically designed to carry hydrogen, which is leakier, smaller. It leaks out of things that methane will not leak out of. It's worth noting that, as far as I know, no one has put the amount of hydrogen into a pipe system of the sort that they're talking about anywhere on this planet. We haven't checked the others, but on Earth, no one has put 20% hydrogen into a pipes, and no one has put hydrogen into the stoves that I used to see when I was doing street organizing in East Boston, where the heating for the kitchen comes from a burner, an open burner on the side of the stove that heats the kitchen. And what happens when you have a more explosive, much higher temperature and much more corrosive gas coming into that? No one knows, including the gas companies, but they're plunging ahead trying to get that gas into our pipes.
And this leads to a different, and we're not going to have it tonight, but you know, hydrogen end use, there's a lot of different possibilities, and this is the scarier one, right? Deb, I saw you getting in there.
Yeah, just to go on, the gas companies, to put another point on Mark's amazing speech, the gas companies make money by building infrastructure. It's the current business model that exists, that's designed by the legislature. It's something that we could change, but we have chosen not to yet. And so this is part, you know, when you say, why are they pushing for more pipes, and why are they pushing for more piped fuels rather than electrification, which even the governor's own study with the technical pathways to the 2050 emissions reduction targets actually showed that electrification is the least expensive way to go. So that's already, even the governor knows that. And yet still, everybody is pushing, well, everybody being led by the gas companies at the DPU is pushing for more pipes and for a very expensive, highly flammable and unproven use for hydrogen into our pipes, instead of actually doing what we know we should be doing, which is shutting down, emitting, carbon creating gas products, gas-like products, whether it's RNG or hydrogen, or carbon equivalency, I should say. And instead, we should just be electrifying. So there, I mean, there's so much. And the problem is that the gas companies, you know, the Secretary of State under Trump was the CEO of Exxon. I mean, these people have an incredible amount of power in our government on every level, whether it's state, local, or federal, and that's something that, you know, we really need to address as a country. That's the reason why this is happening. So I mean, that's a big reason why this is happening in my mind. And there are lots of great people in leadership positions who are fighting this, but there's still a lot of ground for us to cover to build the movement to actually create the political will to stop this craziness.
Carrie.
Yeah, so I'd say that there's definitely one common theme that runs throughout this is kind of an institutional inertia. Oh, you know, the gas companies have been putting gas through this pipe since the Civil War, so they're going to keep putting some kind of gas through this pipe, and we're not going to question whether that makes sense. You know, we've built this infrastructure, so now it must be used. So definitely challenging that mindset, and definitely pushing against the kind of, there's definitely an element of just people tend to assume that the status quo is cheaper. So always being able to point out like, no, actually what we're doing is going to cost us $20 billion to keep the gas system operating. This isn't cheaper, in simply disseminating that information and making sure that people, you know, take action, because you know, the status quo is not comfortable. It just looks that way from where we sit.
Absolutely. So Melissa has a question that we sort of answered, but I think maybe this will be our last audience question before we wrap. And I want to make sure that we get more specific. So what efforts are being made to push both electrification of public transit and to push people to use public transit? So I think we talked about, you know, the cost of public transit, and we had that sort of loose conversation about it. But do we have any legislation or efforts around sort of combining those two concepts that you're following?
I haven't seen anything like that.
Mark?
The Senate passed legislation has a series of provisions that compel electrification of fleets. And I'm trying to remember if they have, I mean, obviously there are experiments. Michelle Wu has initiated experiments in sort of the other side of it, which is try, how about we don't charge people for using transit, and that'll make it cheaper. And it seems to me that the combination of those two is what we need. I don't, Deb, you may know this. I don't think there's a pilot in the Senate legislation on fares. I don't recall.
And not that I know of, or if there is, I haven't heard that it has legs, I should say.
Yeah, no,
but I will say that there, yeah, I just lost my train of thought. There are, I believe in the Senate bill that there are targets for electrification of public transit. And there are also not just in Michelle Wu's MBTA, but also in other regional transit authorities, there are free, no fare or low income fare pilots around the state. As far as like, work to get electrification of fleets, like T4Mass that Jen is very involved with. They're doing a lot of work on that. Sierra Club, we have our one staff person who works on transportation. That's pretty much her entire focus is electrification of fleets and of the MBTA. So there is, again, like you can join up with different organizations, whether it's T4Mass or Sierra Club or 350, and work particularly on those campaigns. But in terms of legislative bills that are doing low income fares, I really don't know of anything that's doing that right now, but that doesn't mean it's not there.
So I think we are nearing the end. I will just put a plug in. Worcester actually is one of the communities that has done a fare-free pilot. They use some of the stimulus money from the feds to do that. It's been extremely successful. So if you are curious to read about that and how it's been going, look that up. Amy, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks. I just had to unmute. Thank you so much. This was a fabulous panel discussion. I want to thank Jen, Mark, Deb, and Carrie. It's been a great way to kick off the Newton Dems Climate Crisis panel. If you enjoyed this conversation, folks, please join us again on Tuesday, May 10th, when we will be hosting a conversation between State Senator Cynthia Cream and State Representatives Kay Kahn and Ruth Balzer, the three fabulous representatives that we have that are leading efforts on attacking the climate crisis that we are faced with. And we'll hear about their perspectives on state level climate and energy policy from inside the State House. So thank you everyone for coming this evening, and we look forward to seeing you again on the 10th. And folks, this has been recorded, so if folks want to see it, we'll have it posted on the Newton Dems website. So thank you all again for your participation, and have a great evening.